EDO. Neither of them noticed when everyone else vanished. And that's the unsettling thing about isolation. It rarely announces itself. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is the Campfire Files. Gather around, because tonight we continue with the city beneath the city. This is Chapter 3, 6 Million Dead. And by the end of today's episode, Matt and Claire will discover that being lost isn't the worst thing that can happen beneath Paris. Being found is. If you're enjoying the series, I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us a rating and a review. It's one of the simplest ways you can help independent podcasts grow. Now, back beneath the city. Every city possesses places where the ordinary rules of behavior seem to change without anyone announcing that they've changed. Libraries inspire whispers. Churches encourage stillness. Courtrooms produce a formality that would feel absurd just about everywhere else. We rarely think about those shifts because they occur so naturally. Architecture influences emotion more effectively than most of us even realize. Ceiling height affects conversation. Light alters your confidence. Narrow spaces encourage caution. Human beings have spent thousands of years adapting themselves to the environments that they build, often without recognizing those small negotiations taking place between stone and instinct. The Paris Catacombs participate in that conversation more effectively than maybe any other public space in Europe. So by the time Matt and Claire reached the first galleries containing human remains, they'd already surrendered to a much slower pace. The long descent, the cool air, and the steady progression through quarry tunnels had gently separated the underground world from the city above, until daylight began feeling less like a place they had recently occupied and more like something they vaguely remembered. They were hardly alone in that transformation. Visitors entered the catacombs talking about dinner reservations and museum schedules. 10 minutes later, those same people found themselves speaking in measured voices, lingering before old quarry inscriptions, and reading historical plaques with an attention they might never have offered above ground. The first wall of skulls always surprises people, no matter how many photographs they've seen beforehand. Images flatten the experience into something decorative, almost artistic. But standing a few feet away from thousands of carefully arranged human remains, that has the opposite effect. The symmetry is remarkable, but symmetry quickly gives way to arithmetic. Every skull belonged to someone who expected one more tomorrow. Every femur supported someone through childhood, through illness, through disappointment and celebration, and ordinary afternoons, now long lost to history. 6 million is a number impossible to comprehend until you reduce it to one person and then multiply that realization by generations. Claire stood before one gallery longer than Matt had expected. She wasn't scared. She looked thoughtful in the same way that she often did inside museums, as though she'd reached the point where observation slowly became conversation. Now, she later admitted that she had been trying to imagine the individual lives hidden inside the walls. Someone had carved furniture from wood. Someone had baked bread before sunrise. Someone had fallen in love beneath a sky that just no longer existed. Eventually, they all became anonymous participants in the same extraordinary solution to an impossible civic problem. There was something profoundly democratic about the catacombs. Kings and laborers. Eventually, they all surrendered the same bones. But Matt noticed different things. The engineer in him admired the astonishing practicality of the place. The galleries remained dry despite lying beneath one of Europe's largest cities. Reinforcement pillars had been integrated so naturally into the quarry system that they appeared almost original. Drainage channels carried away groundwater with understated efficiency. It struck him that millions of visitors came searching for mystery while walking through one of history's greatest engineering achievements. Human beings, he reflected, often become so captivated by dramatic stories that they overlook the equally remarkable accomplishments standing directly beside them. The official route wound gently through chamber after chamber, alternating between historical displays and long passages where quarry marks remained visible beneath centuries of mineral deposits. Some inscriptions were purely practical, recording dates or directions or the names of work crews who had labored there generations earlier. Others seemed almost conversational, little reminders that anonymous workers had once occupied these same corridors, carrying lanterns instead of smartphones, measuring progress one hammer strike at a time. One inscription caught Claire's attention because someone had carved a simple sentence beneath the quarry marker sometime during the 19th century. Remember that we too once walked beneath the sun. Those words lingered with her. She photographed the inscription, adjusted the focus, and photographed it again from a different angle before slipping the camera back over her shoulder. Later, she would remember taking the picture with unusual clarity. She would remember the texture of the limestone beneath her fingertips, the coolness of the air, and the faint smell of minerals rising from the old quarry walls. What she wouldn't remember, what neither of them would remember, was the person standing several yards behind them who appeared in neither photograph despite casting a shadow plainly visible on the stone. At least, not yet. They continued deeper into the route, and somewhere along the way, Matt realized that he'd stopped checking his watch. Time behaves differently underground. Without sunlight or changing weather or the ordinary rhythms of a city, minutes become strangely elastic. 10 minutes feels like 30. Half an hour then could just disappear almost unnoticed. Historians have suggested that people orient themselves through constant, unconscious reference to the movement of the sun, a habit so deeply ingrained that its absence alters perception. Underground environments often produce mild disorientation for precisely that reason. And that explanation satisfied Matt immediately. It belonged to the familiar world of psychology and physiology, where unusual experiences still obeyed understandable rules. But then he heard someone say his name. It wasn't loud. In fact, the voice seemed almost careful, pitched at precisely the volume that one would use when trying not to interrupt another person's conversation. Matt. He turned so quickly that Claire looked up from the display she'd been reading. What? What's up? I thought someone just called me. She glanced around, behind them. The corridor remained busy with visitors moving at the same unhurried pace that they had adopted since descending, but no one close enough for Matt to hear him. A family was close by studying one of the historical plaques, but not close enough. An elderly couple consulted a visitor map, but again, too far away to start a conversation. 2 university students photographed the quarry ceiling with entirely unjustified confidence in their camera's flash. And none of them appeared to have noticed Matt at all. "But do you know somebody here?" she asked. He smiled, despite himself. "I don't know anybody within 4,000 miles, he said. And the explanation arrived almost immediately. Sound. Stone corridors carry voices in peculiar ways. A conversation 50 feet away can seem to originate immediately beside you, while someone standing only a few yards behind becomes strangely difficult to hear. Every underground guidebook mentions this phenomenon. Again, Matt accepted this without hesitation. He had no reason not to. Rational explanations deserve the first opportunity to succeed. There was someone else on the tour at that time named Matt. Okay. He almost mentioned the incident to a nearby museum attendant before deciding against it. Imagine trying to explain that you'd heard your own name in one of the busiest tourist attractions in Europe. Someone somewhere had undoubtedly said Matt. Okay. Thousands of visitors pass through every day. Statistical probability favored coincidence so overwhelmingly that pursuing any other explanation felt kind of embarrassing. So they kept walking. A few minutes later, Claire slowed unexpectedly. "What is it?" Matt asked. She frowned a little bit towards the passage ahead and kind of looked behind her. I thought someone was following us. So now Matt looked back. Same corridor, same visitors, nothing unusual. You probably just heard footsteps from another group. Yeah, probably. but she didn't sound completely convinced. Now the route curved gently to the left, disappearing behind an outcropping of untouched limestone that had supported the city above for centuries. Matt waited for Claire to catch up before rounding the bend together. Neither of them noticed that the family behind them had disappeared. Neither remembered passing the elderly couple again. And neither questioned why, for the first time since entering the catacombs, they could no longer hear anyone or anything else. Only much later, when both tried to independently reconstruct the afternoon from memory, did they arrive at the same unsettling conclusion. Without ever deciding to do so, they had somehow become completely alone. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Gallery. Neither of them noticed the moment the other visitors disappeared because nothing dramatic announced that change. No lights failed, no warning sounded, and no distant cry moved through the tunnels to separate one version of the afternoon from another. The catacombs simply continued behaving as they always had, carrying sound unpredictably through stone while gently encouraging visitors to move at a pace that felt borrowed from another century. It was only after Claire mentioned the uneasy feeling that someone had been following them that Matt turned again toward the corridor behind them and found himself studying an empty passage stretching farther than he remembered. The family with the young children vanished. So had the elderly couple who'd been consulting their map moments earlier. What unsettled him was not the silence, because underground spaces often swallow sound in unexpected ways, as he had just learned. What unsettled him was the realization that neither of them could remember being passed or passing anyone else during the previous several minutes. So Matt did the sensible thing first, which is to say that he refused to call it a problem, not going to panic. They were in a public attraction. The route was controlled. The group had likely moved ahead while they lingered too long over that one inscription. All they needed to do was continue forward at a slightly brisker pace until voices reappeared, certainly around the next bend. This was such a reasonable plan that both of them just accepted it immediately. And for maybe 30 seconds, it seemed to work. The corridor lights stayed on, the walls retained the same damp mineral smell, things were familiar. Their shoes made the same flat sound against the floor. But the farther they walked, the more the route seemed to lose that reassuring grammar of a museum. All the museum signage disappeared first, then those small protective barriers, then the subtle evidence of regular maintenance that neither had consciously noticed until it was gone. Claire reached for the visitor map tucked into Matt's jacket pocket, and he handed it over with the faint irritation of someone being asked for directions in a place where directions really shouldn't be freaking necessary. The map was never meant to be precise. It was a simplified diagram for tourists, the kind of document that says more about the desired experience than the actual geography. But look, even a simplified map should have corresponded to the path right beneath their feet. Okay, according to the route, they should have passed through a chamber of quarry inscriptions and continued toward a final sequence of ossuary walls before reaching the exit stairs. Instead, the passage had narrowed into a gallery neither of them recognized, with rougher stone, much lower light, and a ceiling that forced Matt to lower his head for the first time since their descent. And that was when the footsteps began on the other side of the wall. Came from their left, separated from them by what appeared to be solid limestone, and the steps they heard matched their pace with enough precision that Matt first assumed that he was just hearing an echo. So he stopped walking, and the sound stopped a fraction later. He took several careful steps forward, and the sound resumed with him. Now, there was a rational explanation available, and he reached for it gratefully. The public catacombs were only a small portion of a much larger network, and cataphiles had been exploring forbidden sections for generations. Someone could easily have been moving through a parallel gallery. Someone could have heard them as well and chosen to amuse himself by matching their pace. Explanation was entirely possible, which wasn't the same as comforting, but at least it was an explanation. Then Claire placed her hand against the wall and withdrew it almost immediately. Matt noticed this and asked what was wrong, and she told him that the stone was warm. And that single detail did more damage than the footsteps had. The entire place was cool in the stable way that underground spaces are always cool. The temperature resting somewhere around 57 degrees, regardless of the weather above. The walls had been cold everywhere else she touched them. This section held warmth beneath the surface, faint but unmistakable, as though something living had been standing on the other side long enough for its presence to pass through the stone. They continued forward because forward remained the only direction that promised an ending. The footsteps kept pace for another full minute and then began moving ahead of them. And that inversion altered everything. An echo can't lead. A prankster can't walk through solid rock unless the wall hides another passage. And the possibility of another passage only deepened the problem because it meant there were corridors all around them that the tourist map refused to acknowledge. The sound traveled beside them, then slightly ahead, then stopped near the next bend. Matt and Claire stopped as well, and in the gap that followed, that's when they heard the voice again. This time it didn't emerge from behind them or from some uncertain distance. It seemed to come from the wall itself, shaped by stone into something intimate enough to feel indecent. It said Matt's name once, with no urgency at all. Claire didn't ask whether he heard it. Her expression had already changed in a way that frightened him more than the voice did. She looked less startled than attentive, as though another layer of sound had become available and she was trying to understand it. Years later, when Matt described that moment, he said it reminded him of watching her in museums when a painting seized her attention completely. She would stand very still, but because some part of her had entered the work before the rest of her had caught up. He saw that same look in the catacombs, directed not toward art, but toward a blank section of limestone that had somehow learned his name. The passage widened into a small chamber where the light seemed older than the electric fixtures should have allowed. On the far wall, beneath a quarry marker worn nearly smooth by time, someone had carved a line in French that Claire leaned forward to read before Matt could stop her. Her translation was hesitant, partly because the lettering was irregular and partly because the sentence made less sense the longer she studied it. The city remembers the names entrusted to it. Matt glanced at the visitor map, then at the wall, then back toward the corridor they had just traveled. And he understood, with the slow dread of a man watching a familiar system fail in real time, that the problem was no longer whether they had lost the group. The problem was that the place around them seemed to know they were there. At the center of the chamber lay a red scarf folded over the back of a metal chair. Claire recognized it before Matt did. She had packed it for the trip, then left it in the hotel room that morning because the day had been too warm. Matt remembered joking about it over breakfast. He remembered watching her drop it onto the small chair beside the bed before they left for the catacombs. But there it was, beneath Paris, clean, folded, and waiting in a chamber that didn't appear on the map. Claire took one step toward it. Matt caught her wrist with more force than he actually intended. But neither apologized. The apology would have belonged to a world in which manners still mattered more than survival. They turned back immediately, although neither believed that the route behind them would remain unchanged. The corridor, seemed longer now. The lights farther apart, the air heavier with the smell of damp stone and old dust. Behind the wall, those footsteps resumed. This time, they didn't bother to match Matt and Claire. They moved in the opposite direction, away from the chamber and deeper into this unseen gallery, as if whatever had been pacing them had completed its part of the exchange and was returning to some other assignment. By the time Matt and Claire saw the first distant glow of the public route, both were moving as quickly as they could without running. When voices finally reached them again, ordinary tourist voices, annoyed, amused, bored, alive, whatever, Claire began crying before she even knew that she'd started. The official exit deposited them into Paris less than 20 minutes later, and that was the detail that neither could reconcile afterward. They felt like they'd been gone for hours. The map said that they'd never left the planned route. The attendant near the exit glanced at their tickets with the complete disinterest of a man who had seen thousands of people emerge shaken from the underground and didn't consider it remarkable. Above them, the city continued under late afternoon sunlight. Cars moved through traffic. Some kid ate ice cream beside a bus stop. Somewhere nearby, a waiter was almost certainly being disappointed by Americans. Paris hadn't changed at all, which was maybe the most frightening thing about it. The city had simply opened, recognized them, and closed again without leaving a mark that anybody could see. On the final episode of The City Beneath the City, Matt and Claire escape. Or at least they think they do. Thanks for listening to The Devil Within. This has been The City Beneath the City, another tale from the Campfire Files, stories that followed them home. The Devil Within is an EVO production recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Branden Morgan.